All right. Well, good evening. Welcome to the regular board meeting of education for North Kansas City Schools on June 23rd. I'm Jan Kalk. I'm president of the Board of Education, and we did have an executive session prior to this, so roll call has been completed. This meeting will be recorded, and individuals are welcome to be present for the meeting in an adjacent room. However, for home viewers, it is recorded and will remain available on our YouTube site. I encourage the board members, please, to use your microphones tonight so that YouTube can pick up your voices. And if you could please speak slowly. Also, it helps in recording the closed caption. At this time, I would ask you to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. At our regular meeting, we allow for time for visitor comments. We have no comments available to us this evening. However, as an opportunity for our patrons or anyone within our district, there is a Let's Talk feature that is available on our website. And we encourage any comments or questions to be directed to that staff or board can be responsive to those questions. We will not have a visitor comment section again until our next regular meeting, but we would like to be very responsive. So if you go through that feature, you will receive a comment much more timely manner. Thank you. Now move to the agenda. Do I have an approval for the agenda and a motion, please?
I move approval of the agenda as presented.
I second that.
Dr. Ward and Mr. Harrell seconded. All those in favor of approval of the agenda as presented, say aye.
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 And opposed, same sign. The agenda is approved as presented. Consent agenda. Do I have a motion for approval of the consent agenda as presented?
So moved. Second.
Been moved by Mr. Stone and seconded by Dr. Ward. We have a treasurer's report within that. Dr. Ward.
Yes, Madam President. For details, I would refer the board to the report that was distributed prior to the meeting. We are running as close as we can on budget at this point. We're slightly behind on collections, but not dramatically, and we're running more than that amount under budget for expenditures, so we are still maintaining a favorable relationship. I think the most critical factor is that we're in a time of change. There are new directives coming out of the state, coming out of the federal government, coming out of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed, which do have fiscal implications. Our CFO has provided a summary of about 12 of those things that are sliding around right now. But at this point, we do not view them as having unreasonably large adverse impacts or favorable impacts on our budget. We are anticipating that we will end the year with roughly the same fund balance that we had projected when the year started. That's a net result from a whole lot of things moving around and a whole lot of work by the district finance staff and the line people who are managing the operations every day in the schools and in our facilities and in our buses. So at this point, the careful management that and constraints that the board has put in place are serving us well in spite of the number of forces at work buffeting that plan. The CFO and I would be glad to answer any questions that any of the other board members have.
Any questions? We'll be spending a lot more time with the budget, so we're going to more of the details as we go forward, excuse me. Any other questions regarding items on the consent agenda? Hearing none, we've had a motion and a second for approval of the consent agenda as presented. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. And opposed? Motion carries and the consent agenda is approved as presented. There are items for separate consideration off the consent agenda. Navitas Energy Optimization Service Agreement. Do I have a motion for approval?
I move approval of the agreement to extend the services received from Navitas in support of the district energy plan.
Motion from Dr. Ward. Is there a second?
Second. Go ahead, Carrie.
Okay. Ms. Gleason Miller. Second. Discussion?
I'd just like to say that I'm actually going to abstain from the vote due to the fact that I'm actually employed by Navitas full-time. So therefore, so that there'd be no potential conflicts of interest, I will abstain from the vote this evening.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Ward.
I am very favorably disposed to this proposal. Navitas has been serving this district for 5 years now, 6 years. And during that time, they have crafted a plan, helped us execute the plan, and continue to monitor the plan that is saving this district literally millions of dollars every year. And it is by us reducing our consumption of energy, as expressed in gas, as expressed in electricity, as expressed in water consumption, and their plan is working. The plan was based on a 25% reduction. We're currently achieving a 37% reduction from what our run rate used to be, and that's real money, and especially as we look at the rest of the budget discussions for tonight, the savings of $1 to $2 million a year over historic is dramatic. At the same time, it also means we're being very Northland. There are concerns about the environment and our ability to reduce our negative impact on the environment is, I think, part of our role as public stewards. So with that, it also behooves us to press forward with these kinds of initiatives and to continue to look for new ways. As some of you are aware, North Kansas City High School was built as net zero ready, which means after we put solar panels on the roof, it is possible that the net consumption of energy at North Kansas City High School would be zero. The 2 new elementary schools are being planned with room for a solar field to be established on the property. They will be built to net zero standards with that kind of potential to complete the getting them off the grid. We're looking with the addition at Staley High School for the same type of thing. And so this contract to continue to engage with Navitas as our partner and to have that third-party audit and consultation to help us maintain the path we're on, I think is a very effective investment. And so I would strongly encourage this board to endorse the renewal proposal that's before us.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other comments? Hearing none, then, all those in favor of approval of the service agreement, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, same sign. And abstention.
One extension.
Thank you very much. Motion is carried. Under new business, we are going to be discussing our fund balance transfer, and I believe Mr. Fritz is going to be addressing that for us.
So that we take money out of our general operating funds and transfer them to the special revenue fund to cover expenditures in there. We also transfer them out of the general fund to the capital projects fund in order to allow us to purchase types of equipment. This year's transfer is before you in the memo, and this is a typical thing that we've done each and every year. This one isn't all that different. So if I would entertain any questions regarding the fund balance transfers, if there are any.
Very clear. Thank you very much for the document resolution. Do I have a motion to consider this for approval?
So moved.
Moved by Dr. Ward, seconded by Ms. Reinhardt. Any other discussion? Hearing none, it's been moved and seconded for the fund balance transfer as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Motion is carried, and the balances will be transferred. Thank you. And I believe then we're going into our preliminary budget discussion, and you also have that item.
Yes, thank you. And as we review this budget today, there are more uncertainties than can be accounted for in a static document that attempts to predict the future. In addition to the many uncertainties, the district faces numerous operational uncertainties that will undoubtedly have financial impacts as we progress through the year. I'll be walking you through the short book to provide the highlights of the information contained within the budget. First, I'd like you to take a look at Dr. Clemens has put together his thoughts on the upcoming year and prepared an opening statement that reflects his thoughts as we head into the new year on page 4 and 5, which includes the primary function I alluded to earlier. It includes our recent $155 million bond ballot initiative that over 78% of our community supported in the June election. It includes concerns around state revenues, which accounts for about 27% of the district's non-bond funded funding. It includes concerns on the overall impact of the global pandemic. that the global pandemic will have in the upcoming year. And it includes competence in leadership to be innovative, flexible, and mission-driven as we navigate through the coming year. As we move forward to pages 6 through 9, that's where the executive summary is. The executive summary highlights some general revenue and expenditure categories and key factors and performance indicators related to each. As you read through there, that's kind of the 10,000-foot view on the various categories of revenues and expenditures and what is contained within this budget in a storyline form, if you will, versus the spreadsheets and numbers form that I'm going to get into in more detail. The financial section begins on page 14. And that is hard for me to see, so I am going to open my book as well. And we'll walk through the financial section, and I will give good information for you all as we go. So this first page, it starts with the beginning of the current year, where we had a 19.96, almost a 20% fund balance. Throughout the year, we have received and spent funds, and as Dr. Ward mentioned in the Treasurer's update, we had a lot of ups and downs, a lot of changes along the way. But at the end of the day, or as we get to the end of June 30 of 2020, we're going to be about in the same position we were at the beginning of this year with a 19.45 fund balance. And those are the key items on this page. Again, the receipts and expenditures are still estimated for the full year at this point, but they should be very, very close. As you can see, we have over a $300 million budget, and that is only continues to grow as our school district grows. The next page, page 15, is the projections for the fund balance heading into 2021. As you can see, we start at the same point, the 19.45% fund balance. And also, as you can see, we end up with a 16% fund balance. At this time, I just want to bring back to the board's attention our fund balance percentage goal is plus or minus 2% of 16%. So we've dipped as low as 14% since I've been here. And so the range is essentially 14 to 18%. But the last couple of years, we've noticed that we've been growing. We've been moving in a direction to issue bonds, and that higher fund balance has allowed us to be more flexible as we move forward throughout the year. And that is also something that I think we need to potentially revisit as we move forward, is what is our fund balance goal, and does that 14 to 18% still make sense? But that's, again, for further discussion as well. But as you can see, the projected fund balance meets that goal. Included in this year, we have a placeholder for the $155 million in bonds that we are planning to issue this year. As I work with our financial advisor, municipal advisor, we are determining what that right mix of issuance is. It may be $155 million all at once here in August, or we may break it into a couple different tranches. We're working through that, and that depends a lot on market conditions, the interest rates that we get, fees associated with issuances, things like that. But I wanted to point that out. Additionally, as you can see in the capital projects bond issue 41 line, we have expenditures estimated at $62 million. So that's also a consideration when we issue the bonds, is we don't necessarily need all 155 right up front. we're only expected to be able to spend 62 this coming year. So again, these numbers are a point in time. It's kind of our stake in the ground at this point, and we will adjust and move forward as necessary. The next page is our fund transfers. The memo and the fund transfer that we just approved prior to this is what this will look like next year, potentially. And that just shows the different movement. One of the reasons we do this is the rules of fund accounting allow us to move money in the direction from a general fund to the more specific funds like special projects and capital projects. We cannot move it the other way. So we tend to hold a lot more of our funds in the general fund with the option to move it to the special revenue and the capital projects. That allows us more flexibility. One of the things that the governor has just announced going into the upcoming year is that they are going to allow transfers from the capital projects to the general fund going in this year, but it may or may not be necessary for us to do that. Most likely not, but because of the way that we plan and we show that everything's in the general and we only move it when it's necessary. The next page includes our revenue projections and the last 3 years prior to kind of give you an idea of what that growth looks like in our revenue. This one includes the issuance of the $155 million bond. So as you can see, that takes up a big chunk. The next one is what you're more used to seeing as far as revenue projections. I just took the $155 million bond issuance out so that we can kind of see, one of the important things is to see where does our money come from. Our local taxes provide almost 65% of our funding for the school district. And our state dollars represent a little over 27%, with some federal money in there and then some county and some other things as well. So this gives us a more consistent look over the years when you take out the bond revenue funds. The next one is probably really easy to read for those of you on this side of the room. I'm glad you all have a book in front of you and devices that you can look at it on your screens. This is our assessed valuation, our trend. As I mentioned on the slide before, almost 65% of our funds come from our local taxes. Our local taxes are based on our assessed valuation, which is the valuation of all the residential real estate, commercial real estate, and personal property within our 82 square mile district. The next page, we have some graphs that show the growth in our assessed valuation. One of the interesting things here is that we're getting to a point, when I first started, we had, this went back as far as 2006, I believe. And we can see in 2006, you can see the tail end of that dip and then the rise out of the recession of 2008. And so I think we've fully recovered from that and then some. It remains to be seen the full impact on our assessed valuation, what the global pandemic will do, if anything. I think it's largely dependent on how quickly we are recovering out of it. This past year was a non-reassessment year. As we go into 2021, it will be a reassessment year. So that will give us a better idea in the coming years of what impact the coronavirus has had on our local property values. The one thing that I did notice was interesting. We've seen a significant increase in TIF values over the years, especially since I've been here. And this was the first time I received a notice from the county for our June certification of the assessed valuation that showed a decrease in our TIF and our overall TIF values. So hopefully that trend will continue. The next slide gives us kind of an idea of what our levy does for us. We have the rate broken down. Our overall rate currently is 6.2023. That's made up of the incidental fund at 2.5423. Our teachers fund, or the special revenue fund, is 2.24. Our capital projects is at 0.13. And then our debt service levy, which we did not increase as part of the last bond issuance, is still at $1.29. As you look down towards the bottom in that box, the bottom of that box shows us kind of the overall projected revenue that we will achieve with the assessed valuation that we have projected, and the rate and the fees that we pay the county. You'll see that $146 million at the bottom is what we project to receive in revenue from our assessed valuation. And then down the side, our boxes those are all our most recent, dating back to 2001, our levy increases and what the amounts were for and what the amounts are. The next page, this page becomes more critical in the August budget. Right now, we do not have a tax rate adjustment projected in this budget. We leave it flat in June because it's always difficult to tell whether we're going to have to roll that back or not. So this is, you'll see that last change from prior year column is all zeros, but that's just because we're looking at a projection for next year that hasn't changed. This will become more important as we get into the August budget, but I wanted to show it here as well. The next slide is our Prop C sales tax. As you can see, our revenue has increased year over year here. One of the big things that was impacted through the pandemic was sales tax. Still not fully known. I should say, as of the printing of this, it was not fully known. We have received a good Prop C wasn't as affected as originally thought. A lot of the things the items at the grocery store still pay the Prop C tax, even though they may not qualify under certain local sales taxes. But they do qualify for Prop C. So you can see the dollars per pupil was projected at the beginning of the year to be 1,036. It ended up closer to 990, or right around 1,000, I believe. And next year we kept that lower. The full Prop C estimate for next year prior to COVID was going to be about 1049, but we've, in this budget, for reasons of conservatism and for consistency with what this year has looked like, we've left that at a lower amount of 1,000. Hopefully, as we begin to reopen and we don't experience any more shutdowns, that will prove to be a conservative estimate. This is our state formula. This is how it's calculated in words. The next few slides will give us kind of the detailed calculation for the state foundation formula. This is the weighted ADA calculation, which is just one input into the foundation formula. We start with our ADA. As we get into this, all the future years are estimated. Next year is estimated, but we're paid on the current year. And so as you walk through this, there's just some different, we have a free and reduced weighting threshold, which changes over time depending on how many kids we have in those categories. There's a special education weighting threshold and an LEP weighting threshold. All those numbers have potential for variance year over year, but they have been somewhat consistent, and so we feel pretty confident that those will be very close.
For our viewers, could you say what ADA means, please?
ADA is our average daily attendance, and the weighted ADA is our weighted average daily attendance, obviously, WADA, we call it. So that bottom line you'll see is kind of our projections for our weighted ADA that go into the formula calculation. The next page is our local effort. This is kind of where our baseline that was established back in 2005-06. It's really a calculation that determines what that lowest number is that we would be reimbursed by the state. Since then, we've had tremendous growth in our student population, and so it would take quite a big change for us before we would ever drop below into a hold harmless status, which is what this helps us determine. Here is the calculation itself. As you can see, the current year, we're using a fully funded state adequacy target, or SAT. That SAT is at fully funded level is 63.75. The current year, due to lower than expected state revenues, was appropriated with an adjustment percentage of 96.5%. And what that means is typically when the state will adjust the payment to the districts, they will use the SAT to show the formula is either fully funded or it's not. The governor this time used this appropriation method in order to include hold harmless districts in the sharing of the lost revenue. So by doing it at the end instead of in the beginning, we don't have hold harmless districts getting excluded from the loss in revenue. So as you can see down in the box where it begins number 16, you'll see in 1920 we have 96.5% appropriation. Next year we have the same SAT is projected at fully funded level of 63.75, and I went ahead and carried forward that 96.5% allocation. This is one of those items where we don't have a real good guess. We're trying to be conservative in our estimates, and so we carried that forward, and we'll know more July 1st. Actually, I think we'll know more. So again, this is a static document as you see it before you, but it is very fluid in its execution throughout the year. Here is just beginning on page 28 and going through page 30 is just all of our object codes. It basically tells at a more detailed level where the funds are coming for. This is all our revenue lines. We've included the last 3 years of actuals. We have the proposed budget in there so you can get a variance and look at kind of the ebbs and flows in those different categories. But ultimately, as you can see, the $155 million, again, kind of throws off the totals a little bit, as you can see, but this allows you to look at it line by line so that you can see where those big changes occur. Now, moving on to the expenditure side. This is our total budgeted expenditures for all funds. as you can see, this includes capital, let's see, yep, capital outlay for bond, and that's 65 million or 62 million that I had mentioned before that we have the potential to spend out of that fund. It throws off kind of our percentages that we're used to looking at, and so here is what our operating expenditures. This gives us a better idea, more consistent look without the off years of bond expenditures and whatnot. So here you can see our salary and benefits make up, we're a people organization, and we are about 77, a little more than 77% goes towards our people, our salaries and our benefits, and the remaining is for purchase services and supplies. And again, this is a by fund. The next page, I'm sorry, beginning on page 33 is our by fund expenditures. So going across the top columns, we have the general fund, the special revenue fund, the different funds, and then down the side we have the different expenditure codes that you can see. And this is just a one-year look, but it gives you an idea of where the different expenditures come out of the different funds. And with that, that's the big financial news. I would like to kind of summarize just by saying those first two pages in the financial section really give us kind of our 10,000-foot view guide. Where is our money coming from? Where is it going out? And what kind of operating funds do we have on a year-to-year basis? And Dr. Clemens, did you?
I'd just like to say thank you to Matt. This is a really hard thing to do to build this budget, as most of us expect. We see $500 million numbers starting to come in when we look at bond proceeds and such. Every day we get new news on our budget, withholdings, restrictions, whatever. And so I text Matt almost daily asking him to adjust these numbers and to do the best bet. Personally like to say thank you. Agility is going to be the key word that I would use tonight when we talk about this budget. We're going to have to be agile as we move forward. There'll be times when we think we're okay, and there's going to be times when we're going to have to make some reductions within our organization in order to meet the column. When you look at that 19.4% fund balance reduced to 16% in 1 year, I think about that when I'm in my office worried about things, about 2 million a percent. And so you start to think we can't deficit spend over time that kind of in that kind of manner. But I think Matt's done a really good job of building a conservative budget and giving us the time to address the change in that fund balance for us to continue to move forward. So personally, I just want to thank Matt. He's down a person in his department, so all of this work has been done on his own, and certainly with me nagging at him all the time. I bet he's really glad today's finally here.
Yep.
There's some questions.
Yes.
Yeah, just one. I know you took into account the earlier cuts from the governor. There's rumors July will bring further cuts. Was that put into the projections as well?
Yes, so on the appropriation percentage, moving that 96.5% into the next year as well, that allows us to essentially builds in $100 million statewide reduction in K-12 spending. So the governor has announced anywhere from 300 to 500 million in cuts to the state budget. One of the general ideas that's out there, and this isn't hard facts or anything, but it's about 20% of that will come from K-12 budget. So 20% of 500 is 100 million, and so we've kind of got the largest impact of that built in currently.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I would just echo the superintendent. As your treasurer, Matt and I sat down and spent a significant amount of time going over this budget and looking at the assumptions, looking at the pieces that are here. I can tell you I've looked at a lot of these budgets over the years, and I don't remember a year when there were this many variables that were truly and honestly in play. I also will say that usually this is a good hard cut at things, and August usually doesn't vary much. As Dr. Clemens said, this is, announcement of the day. And so for any of us to sit here and think that this is really the August budget is probably delusional. However, in looking through it and looking at the pieces, in total, I support Matt's view of what our budget will look like. He and I may wobble a time or two on the way through here, but by and large, I think it's a good conservative budget. I think it's something we can use to guide our decisions. But it also goes to saying, hey, a lot of this is pretty much steady as she goes, and there's going to be some things that aren't going to be steady as she goes. So for us to eat 3.5% of fund balance in 1 year is rugged, and we're going to have to watch it very carefully. But when it's all said and done, I support the budget that Matt has brought to the board for our consideration.
Thank you.
Yes, I'd take this off one second. Yes, I would like just to say thank you and echo the comments that have been made. Certainly I'm very supportive of the budget and the budget process that you went through. I know that there's a tremendous amount of input from our staff and our community, and I'd specifically not only like to thank you and your staff, but I'd also like to thank our community, because our community has made it possible for an additional $155 million worth of revenue to come into the district in the next fiscal year to address our facilities. So again, we're very appreciative of that. More than anything else, again, as you've mentioned, this is a working document. It certainly gives us the guiding parameters to go forward. What I'm most appreciative of is that our community has allowed us to be very supportive of our schools financially. Therefore, I think we're in a healthy but not a wealthy position, specifically with our fund balances. So we're able to sustain some cuts from the state level and actually continue on with our school year for the 2020-21 school year. Because again, we are in a healthy situation at this point in time and can absorb some of those cuts. I think our bigger challenges are in the future, where again, we need to do everything possible in one aspect to try to sustain our cuts that we have from the state so that they're not permanent forever. Because I think it will have impacts in future years as we draw down our fund balance. We can't continue in this trend forever, as Dr. Clemens just said. But nevertheless, we're in a great position today because we do have a healthy fund balance. We're able to buy time. Again, we're looking for a very successful 2020-21 school year that will look different, I'm sure, than any school year in the past. But nevertheless, we're able to start it with the resources we need on day one. So thank you and your staff.
I learned from the best. Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment that the CARES funds are also listed in this document, and we received monies last fiscal year and anticipate some this year, but can you just address that briefly?
Yes, that is a great point. And one of the ups and downs of this current year, the restrictions and reduced state funding, partially offset by the money we received via Clay County from the Federal CARES Act. We've received $1.95 million this year, which has been a big part of why we were able to have that good fund balance at the end of this year. A lot of what goes into that, the current year, We've had the reduction in state revenue, reduction in Prop C, but we've also had the CARES Act. We've also been able to save money by turning down the energy consumption in all of our buildings while the kids were gone. We had the ability to not pay overtime. A lot of times in the spring we have all kinds of events. We've got buses going every direction. And while I think we did an excellent job under Dr. Clemens saying, you know, hey, we're not getting rid of anybody, we're not laying anybody off, we're paying people, but at the same time we didn't incur the extra cost of the time and effort, the above and beyond that a lot of our employees do. So some of those, that's part of that back and forth give and take. And then into next year, we have been allotted via the state another $2.3 million, I believe it is, through CARES Act funding. One of the things that we have to be careful about is not submitting the same expenditures. Each one of those requires us to submit expenditures that we've incurred that meet a certain set of criteria related to COVID or the global pandemic. And so we have, between our technology upgrades with the servers that we did last month, that'll help us be better at online, with some of the salaries of people that we've paid to do jobs not related to what they currently do, and help out in different areas, like serve food and those types of things. So we've got a lot of those expenditures that we're able to use. We just have to make sure that we're not doing it twice for the different sources. So.
Madam President, and I'd
Yes.
also like to say Matt and his team is doing a really good job as well, seeking FEMA resources for other causes. So I think one of the things this pandemic has provided us an opportunity to do is to try to gain resources to offset some of the shortfalls. And I'd just like to compliment Matt and his team for making sure we have the right alignment to be able to receive those funds. And certainly like to thank this Board of Education for allowing us to continue to employ 3,600 people through the pandemic and ensure that they kept their benefits. And moving forward, that will continue to be a challenge, but certainly appreciate the board's support in making that happen for us.
Well, I think we did a really nice job responding, and this year, and thank you for your hard work with this.
Yep.
And we understand we will be agile
Yes.
going forward. What do you need from us tonight?
Tonight we need to approve this budget. By state law, we have to have a budget approved prior to July 1.
Okay. All right.
I move approval of the budget as presented.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any other questions? All those in favor of approval of the budget as presented this evening, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, same sign. And the budget is approved. Thank you very much for all your hard work. We appreciate you and your
Thank you.
staff. Moving on, we're going to the board superintendent reports and discussions, and we'll be discussing a reentry update. And Dr. Sutton, I believe, will be presenting. Dr. Clemens, do you have any preliminary comments that you'd like to make?
First of all, what you're going to see tonight is a draft. And then I would encourage you to see it as a draft. We continue to seek input from Clay County Health Department, from the CDC, from all the Northland superintendents. We're on a metro group with Kaufman of superintendents in the entire metro. Nearly every cabinet member has been working a piece of this since the middle of March. And on a weekly basis, it changes. And I would encourage this board to understand that we will need to be flexible in the next 2 months. Departments or other school districts to ensure consistency among our return.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, Dr. Clemens and Mr. Harrell set me up perfectly for my presentation tonight. Dr. Clemens using the word agile. That may be my one word, I think, this year in the 2021 school year. Certainly applies to our return to school plan, and Mr. Harrell's comment that the 2021 school year is going to be unlike any school year we have experienced as well. But I certainly appreciate the opportunity to update you tonight with the highlights from our draft return to school plan. And as Dr. Clemens said, it certainly is a draft. We're still in the process of collecting feedback. We'll collect feedback tonight. We're starting to incorporate some of the feedback from our local health officials, Clay County Health Department, some of the medical professionals that are working with us as well, and then also, of course, working in partnership with CTTN through any working condition challenges that this plan may impose as well. So working collaboratively with everyone to create this plan, and our goal would be to have it finalized no later than the middle of July, but we will be operating with our draft as we open up our face-to-face summer school July 6th, and of course Wynwood and Crestview on July 13th. But I do want to begin by just recognizing the change in context that we're going to experience from the spring, of course, to this fall. And last spring, during e-learning, our students, of course, had their parents, most of them had their parents home during e-learning, and so they had supervision and they had the support of their family or family members. And as the economy continues to open, our families continue to go back to work, especially by the time we start school in the fall. If, for whatever reason, schools were required to reduce capacity or to once again close, that supervision and support provided by our families may certainly cause additional challenges. And so all the more reason that we have a plan in place to reduce risk for our students and staff and to prioritize the health and safety of our entire educational community. So as you can imagine, we have explored lots and lots of scenarios throughout the past several weeks. And these scenarios, especially scenarios 2 through 4, are designed to respond to possible direction from the Clay County Health Department if we had to reduce the capacity in order to allow for increased physical distancing within our schools. And to really communicate with our families so they would know the plan way ahead of time in case we did have to reduce capacity. And so scenario 1 is simply all of our students back in school. Of course, we'll have safety protocols and practices in place, and I'll share some of those here in just a minute. But right now, that is our intention to begin with scenario 1 with all of our students back in school. Scenario 2 is reducing our capacity to 50%. And if we were to do that, our strategy would be to divide our students essentially into 2 groups based on the first letter of their last name. And of course, we know that we have some students in the same family that may have last names, and we would of course work with our families to ensure that they would be going to school on the same day. So essentially the way that this would work is that Group A on a Monday, we'll use as an example, that 50% of our population would be face-to-face, and then the other 50% would be virtual. And in this plan, what you see is that would happen on alternating days, but some of the feedback I've received was that it would probably be more effective and efficient for our families if we had that same group attend, let's say, Monday and Tuesday, and then maybe Wednesday would be a day for deep cleaning, e-learning for all students, and then Thursday and Friday would be our second group of students that would attend face-to-face. And then our third scenario would be reducing our capacity to 25% of our student population. And so essentially students would attend face-to-face 1 day a week. The other 4 days during that week would be e-learning, with that 5th day on Friday being e-learning for all of our students. And then the fourth scenario, yes?
Go through that again, please.
So for the third scenario, we'd reduce our capacity to 25%. So we'd have 25% of our student population that would attend each day. So they would come face-to-face 1 day a week, and then that 5th day on that Friday up here as an example would be e-learning for all of our students throughout the district. And then the fourth was one that we experienced this past spring, which would be e-learning for all of our students in the case that schools had to close for a small period of time or an extended period of time. And we are certainly prepared for that one now. And then virtual options is certainly, we've been receiving some questions about virtual options, and we will have virtual options for all of our students. So as we have families that may not feel comfortable sending their students back to school, we will have options for our students. We certainly have had those at the high school level, and we've had some at the middle school level. The elementary, we have not in the past. So we have put out an RFP. We're getting ready to wrap that up so that we can have a plan and some curriculum and support for those families that want a full virtual option. So we will be prepared for that. So our task force was comprised of over 40 individuals. We had some medical professionals that were a part of it as well, but very few of us have a background in epidemiology. But I'm telling you, we learned a lot throughout the past several weeks, and this task force has combed through hundreds and hundreds of documents and collectively have put hundreds of hours in learning so much about COVID-19, reading through CDC recommendations, Clay County Health recommendations, reopening plans throughout the country. We even had the opportunity to have a Zoom call with international principals from Switzerland, Germany, and Australia, because they have had students that came back in the spring, and so we were able to get some advice and feedback from them as well, which was really, really powerful. And through all of our studies and research, there are some common recommendations and universal practices to reduce the risk in schools that are recommended. First one, of course, face coverings and social distancing, or physical distancing is another way to phrase that. The CDC does recommend the use of face coverings when feasible, and it's especially important when social distancing cannot be accomplished or is a challenge. And in our schools, in most cases, in most scenarios, physical distancing will certainly be a challenge. So right now, we will be requiring all of our students and staff to wear face coverings as a strategy to lower the levels of risk for all of our students and staff and our entire educational community. Regular hand washing, sanitizer, you can imagine. The first thing that kids are going to do when they come in every day is wash their hands with soap and water. We're going to be setting records this year for the amount of soap, I think, and hand sanitizer that we use. That's going to be a huge priority and built in frequently into our schedules throughout the day for all of our pre-K through 12 students. The use of community supplies. More and more research is pointing to the idea that the transmission of the virus is not as high as what they originally believed it was on hard surfaces. However, we're still going to take lots of precautionary measures and limit the use of community supplies in our schools. However, for those community supplies that we may need to share or utilize, would certainly be sanitized after every use for our students. Classroom cleaning checklists. These are checklists that were designed at each one of our levels, pre-K all the way through high school, and these will be utilized by our classroom teachers, and these will be practices above and beyond what our facilities crew is already going to be doing in terms of cleaning, especially those high-touch surfaces. So essentially in the elementary level, what this looks like would be an additional sanitization, at least one, throughout the course of the day. We've been working with Dr. Evans and his team, and we have a sanitizer that you spray on hard surfaces and you let it sit. It takes about 4 minutes to work. There's no wiping. You just spray it, let it work, do its magic, and then we'll be able to sanitize and do that throughout the course of the day for our students. At the high school level and middle school level, as you can imagine, keeping students together in one cohort can be quite a challenge because we have students going to so many different classes throughout the course of the day. And so our plan right now is to sanitize those classrooms, all the high-touch areas within that classroom at the end of each class. So before the next group of students come in, we will be utilizing that sanitizer to spray desks, high-touch surfaces, so that we can prepare for the next class to come in. So taking a lot of measures and incorporating practices way above and beyond what is very typical with some of our sanitization protocols. Staggering classes, of course, when possible, at the secondary level, that can certainly be a challenge. Our principals are taking a look at how they may do that, but of course, when you stagger classes, you have to have a place for students as well to go. So that's one of the recommendations that they are trying to take a look at and see what the possibilities are. Outdoor classes. One of the things that we, I think, all know about the virus is that it is spread through the droplets in the air and can be aerosolized for, you see different studies that say 30 minutes or sometimes even longer. And so we're going to encourage and get our PE students outside as much as possible during the fall and any time that we can throughout the course of the school year. The other one is choir. There's been a lot of questions as they relate to choir, and if you have seen some of the case studies in New York with the choir and in Washington, the state of Washington, you can see that when singing is occurring and physical distancing cannot happen, that can increase the risk of the spread of the virus. And so singing outside is certainly what we want to be able to do, but there may be some times when we can have or utilize some very large spaces within the building as well and spread our students out way far apart. But those are some of the things that we're looking at, but outdoors is certainly the priority, again, as feasible. All of our assemblies, back to school nights, will be virtual. In the past, of course, we've had lots of face-to-face, but in order to limit gatherings, we want to be able to provide some virtual options and strategies for our families, but still keep them engaged in some of these very important activities as we open up the school year. School bus. With regards to transportation, our bus drivers and aides will be all wearing face coverings. We'll also be asking students to wear face coverings as well on the bus. We would certainly encourage as many families that can to transport their own students. I know that is not always possible, but we would certainly encourage that amongst our families in order to reduce the capacity on buses, but we certainly don't want to deny transportation for students that need it in order to get to school. We'll also be disinfecting the high-touch areas after every route, and also deeper cleaning, of course, then throughout the day as well. And our bus drivers and transportation department produced a video to kind of demonstrate the sanitization process on buses. And I'm going to tell you, once this thing's released, we may have some YouTube stars out there. They did a really, really, really good job. It's pretty awesome. Arrival and dismissal. Our goal at arrival and dismissal is, again, to reduce crowds of students. And so we're working with our building principals to think about different entry points and exit points within the building that we may have not utilized before in order to really reduce those large gatherings of students that sometimes may happen before and after school. Certainly be asking our families to drop students off not too early, but maybe right before the bell rings, so as our doors open and families are dropping students off, again, we don't have large crowds of students gathering outside of our buildings. And the first thing that our students will do as soon as they come in, wash their hands or utilize hand sanitizer, which we will have in every single one of our classrooms. Breakfast and lunch. The CDC recommendation is for our students to eat lunch in their classrooms right now. As you can imagine, having students in a cafe shoulder to shoulder for an extended period of time, and we of course cannot utilize cloth face masks when we're eating, provides a higher risk situation. And so in order for us to lower the risk, we want our students to eat in the classroom. However, we still do have big cafes, and it's not necessary that we leave those completely vacant. So I'm going to work with building principals on developing schedules so that we can still allow some students, maybe on a rotational basis, to eat in the cafe, but of course utilizing physical distancing measures. All of our food will be prepackaged, wrapped meals, and of course when we eat in classrooms, our desks will be disinfected, as well. Yes, both. And then washing of hands. Washing of hands is going to be a theme, and use of hand sanitization throughout the course of the day is going to be a huge priority for us. recess, our kids have to get out. They've got to get out and they've got to run around. The great thing about being outside is it is a lower level of risk when we have kids outside. So we'll certainly be looking at schedules to reduce numbers, but also to think about how we can spread students out on our property as well. Some of our schools have larger properties than others, and we're able to do that while also providing the appropriate levels of supervision. But certainly want to continue to get them outside, and we do have some shared recess equipment, as you can imagine. We're going to do our best to limit that, but also do our best to continue to sanitize some of that shared equipment in between use. And we will certainly encourage physical distancing during recess. As you can imagine, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, they like to touch each other a lot. And so we have to just keep in mind that, you know, some of these things in working with students as we implement these, we're going to have some successes and there are going to be some real challenges as well. Activities, we started activities and conditioning on June 15th. So as you can imagine, our students were very excited to see each other and start to be around their friends a little bit more. And with activities, every day our students are completing a short health questionnaire. And any of those commonly touched surfaces, again, you can kind of see this as a theme, are being sanitized between use, locker rooms being disinfected, and again, social distancing to the extent possible. And then on June 29th is when we begin sport-specific activities. So that will be the next phase of the kind of re-entry into activities. And of course, we are using and following the guidance of the Clay County Health Department as we move forward with our activities as well. I do want to thank this group. Like I said, we had over 40 individuals that were a part of this, and many, as Dr. Clemens said, of course, we're all a part of our cabinet, and collectively, this team to this point has put in hundreds of hours into this plan. It has been quite a journey over the past few weeks, but a journey worth taking, without a doubt, to reduce risk and keep the safety of our students and staff is our #1 priority. A special thanks to, of course, to Dr. Adiga and Dr. Belshi, who are both with Liberty Hospital and North Kansas City Hospital, who gave us some feedback on our plans. We're very supportive of it and complimentary of it, but appreciate their efforts. And of course, Paul Guess and his team and CTTN, we certainly appreciate all of their input as well. And we know that this is a start. As Dr. Clemens said, this is a draft. This is the beginning. We know that requiring face masks for students and staff, there are going to be challenges. We don't know how a 5-year-old will be able to maintain and keep a mask on all day. We don't know. But we certainly know that's a starting point. We know that we're going to have students that have health conditions that maybe wearing a mask might cause more concern or more risk for them. We will work individually with every single one of those families throughout this process. But our goal through all of this is to minimize and reduce risk for our students and staff. And so with that, I'd be...
Dr. Sutton, I'd just add that the other person who reviewed this was Gary,
Yes, we just received some feedback from Gary from the Clay County Health Department as well, and gave us some good feedback and was very complimentary as well. So with that, I'd love to take any questions that you may have. I got my pen and pad here.
Thank you, and thank you for your team for your outstanding use of data and information, well-informed recommendations. I appreciate that. What questions does the board have?
I just have a question about masks and whether or not they'll be provided to students or if they'll be available to be provided to students.
Great question. We will encourage our students and staff to bring their own masks if they can. However, we will provide those. Dr. Hilvitz ordered 25,000 masks, and so those are starting to come in. They are right back here. He is modeling those tonight, so is Matt, and so you can see exactly what we'll be receiving. But we will have them for our students and staff. Yep.
Along with the mask, different sizes preschool through high school?
Yeah, there are a couple different sizes, but the key to the masks is not necessarily the size of the fabric, but instead the adjustability of the band. So we have different ways where we can have it go over their heads, we can hook behind their ears, and they can all be adjusted to fit snugly so that they are form-fitting for everyone, and we have them with and without metal bands, especially for those people with glasses. You know the importance of those metal bands to keep your glasses from fogging.
And what about the Adventure Club sites that are open during this time? Are they following some of these procedures, and how are those things
You
going?
want to talk a little bit about Adventure Club, Tammy?
Adventure Club did resume about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Kids were encouraged to bring masks. The adults in the buildings were all wearing masks. Once summer school starts, we'll go to all the kids wearing masks as well.
Well, thank you for your report. Again, this is a very serious topic, and it's, again, as we said, it's probably a school year that hopefully we won't have to repeat again, but nevertheless, there will certainly be changes, and it will look different from the past. I guess one of the things that's probably important for us to note is, again, it appears that the virus is still obviously strong across the United States. It's very strong in Missouri. It's continuing to increase. So obviously what we do today to make our students' families as safe as possible is extremely important. I guess one of the questions I would have is, if a family would like to pursue the virtual option, what would they need to do to pursue that?
We're just finalizing that process, but they'll work with their building administrators, and then we'll have a process to get them enrolled and get orientation for our families, and then also have an opportunity to meet and connect with what we will be calling a teacher coach that will support them throughout that process.
Gotcha. And if by unfortunate chance we would have issues within our district, is it a one-size-fits-all, or would we look at building by building different within the district if there would be a need for change of a schedule?
You know, it could be building by building. That's very possible. Some of the guidance that I have seen out there may require or ask a building to shut down for a period of time if there's a certain percentage of cases within the building. So it could be a building issue. It could also be a district issue. So that guidance would come directly from the Clay County Health Department.
Thank you. And again, I keep hearing over and over that testing is extremely important. So the question would be, would we have the capabilities of testing our students and staff ourselves through our health professionals, or would that require outside medical care?
At this point, we still believe it would require outside. Yep, so we would certainly, as we work through the process of working with students or staff or families, when there may be a concern of, as a result of COVID-related symptoms, then we would work with the staff member or the family to get them all the available information of testing sites that would be close to this area.
Okay, great. And again, I am asking a lot of questions, but
Yeah.
I think they're important to a lot of people. And again, I think our job is to do our best to inform our community of where we're at. As far as social distancing, again, you talked about the need for that. Is there any changes in class sizes or anything like that anticipated based upon the social distancing requirement?
As of right now, there's not. And so in order to really adhere and follow the guidance in terms of the physical distancing of 6 feet or more, it would certainly require more teachers in order to be able to do that, but also more classrooms as well. So it would probably require us to add to our buildings in order to create more space for students to go. And so that would be one option. The other option is for one of those scenarios that I shared earlier, which would require students to be home as part of the learning process which, it becomes the challenge because we have parents going back to work at this point, so the supervision and support for our families and a lot of our kids may not be there at home. So that may create another challenging dynamic.
So when our sports programs return in the fall, do we think that they'll look a little bit different, or will we be able to have spectators?
The spectators is a great question right now. I know that Casey Vokalek is working closely with the health department, and I have not seen a final recommendation on spectators. Dr. Clemens, of course, may have a little bit more insight into that, but I have not seen a final recommendation. I think it's likely that the number of spectators and capacity very, very well may be limited, but I don't know if there's been a final recommendation for that yet.
Yeah, I think as of right now, it's still crowds up to 200.
Okay.
So MISHA is relying on local health departments to set those guidelines for audience.
Great.
Well, more than anything else, I do want to tell you thank you for the report and thank the committee that worked on that. I know there was tremendous number of hours and resources that were put in to develop the discussion for this evening. Again, as you're saying, it's not a final recommendation. Again, it's a discussion leading up to our plans as we try to open our schools. We certainly do want to open up our schools, but at the same time, making it safe as possible for all involved. So thank you very much. I know I asked you several different questions, but there'll probably be a lot more our community will be interested in. So again, over the next few weeks, I'm sure we'll do our best to keep our community updated. So thank you.
You're welcome.
You mentioned MISHA. What is the current stance of the Missouri High School Activities Association on interscholastic competition, whether that be football, debate, or whatever? What are they anticipating for fall?
Well, right now, the sport-specific practices will begin June 29. So it's anticipated that will continue and that students will have the opportunity to compete in those events this fall.
And then the only other thing I would be is underline a reality. You kind of alluded to it when you opened and said this is the draft as of June 22nd or 3rd, as of 8/28, and I think agility is going to be the byword as we go through the next 2 to 6 months. We're in uncharted waters, so I applaud options 1, 2, 3, and 4, recognizing there's probably 2A, 2B, and 2C, and so forth and so on. And the team you've got that's listed up there, I applaud their efforts in thinking through it and giving us a framework that as a district we can operate within and that our parents can understand the options we're dealing with and the selections we make going forward among those options. So thank you for leading a very, very challenging task force.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, and I would certainly echo some of my colleagues' comments on this, and I think Paul asked most of the burning questions that most people have, and or just kind of playing it by ear is what I'm hearing as a general consensus here. We're going to do the best we can for as many people as we can to get things back rolling the way it used to be, back in the day, which was like 2 weeks ago or whenever. Just a couple of comments. I guess I would say some of this sounds like great projects for the home ec department. I mean, they can just start whipping out those masks like crazy. And the chemistry department, I think they could just crank out all the soap and hand sanitizer you would ever want. And I would say the cafeteria should be, since you can space it out, like a great reward system for, I don't know, whatever that you decide kids need to have. But it's like, okay, you guys get to go to the cafeteria today.
Sure.
So, just a thought.
Thank you.
Now I'll put my mask back on. You're welcome.
In anticipation of this meeting, I spent a lot of the last 2 weeks watching multiple network news programs, and today I spent 6 hours listening to the Senate Committee on Coronavirus. And that's a hard go. Let me add my thanks with my colleagues as to the difficult task that you face and for the way you've approached it and thinking thoroughly about it. But to put a context around what we're discussing, obviously to me, we're looking at the foundation, we're looking at a health issue. And we're looking at the health and safety of our children and our teachers and the rest of our staff. And when you make decisions around that, you go to the experts in the medical field and not folks that aren't experts in the medical field. So kind of in context nationally, today on C-SPAN, you had the head of the CDC, Dr. Redford, you had Dr. Fauci, head of NIH, you had Admiral Gronau, I heard his name pronounced about 5 different ways, but he's the Assistant Secretary of Health. And you had Dr. Hahn, who's the head of the FDA, Food and Drug Administration. And in the other shows I watched, epidemiologists and public health officials from the University of Minnesota, Johns Hopkins, Vanderbilt, University of Washington, but all pretty renowned folks in their field. And one of the reasons I'm mentioning this is one of the things you've recommended is a mask. And all of these folks, all the ones on the networks, and today the entire panel, if there was one place where they agreed on the following: mask, social distance, and keeping your hands clean. So I absolutely encourage and support what I know is a tough decision in the light of folks around us looking at things a little differently. I think that's pretty basic, and even if it's not perfect, and I can imagine a teacher trying to get a bunch of second graders to keep that mask on. I've had this one on since 5:45, and it's a royal pain in the butt, so I understand where kids are going to be with that. But it's important that we make that happen, and I appreciate our decision to do that. Also, one of the things that came up in the session today was the national trend is that the people that catch it are younger as opposed to older, and that's a result of folks going out in the public. And Dr. Fauci kind of spoke to that, and what he said was, I thought was pretty interesting, if I can find my notes here, but he said it's a dual responsibility that we all have. One is to yourself, and one is to others. And he said, people have go out there and they say, I'm young, I'm healthy, who cares? And he said, you should care. Because what he talked about was a chain of events, that a young person can be asymptomatic or have it, and probably they're still in pretty good shape, but goes to somebody else, and it goes to somebody else, and eventually it gets to somebody's grandmother or father or dad who is at higher risk. So the fact that we're willing to take that into account, I really appreciate. That's the fact that we're going to do that. Some questions I have, I'm looking at my notes here. You'll give me one of the scary things that was mentioned, that for the cases they find, they figure there's 10 more they haven't yet found. So to say that, and the other thing that they said, just in terms of context, all of them agreed it's coming in the fall and winter. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of how big and how widespread it will be. They were all in agreement on that. So one of my questions has to do with it dawned on me, if a teacher acquires it, and by the way, I'm assuming if something occurs in a particular classroom, the only place we might have to isolate, test, isolate, trace, et cetera, is that particular classroom. We won't have to necessarily do a whole building. That Is that fair?
That's fair. So with contact tracing,
Yeah.
and we'll be working with the health department just to really figure out what our role is in contact tracing. But generally speaking, there's some guidelines for those families that or students that we would have to contact if they were within 6 feet of that individual that did test positive for an extended period of time. So those would be the ones that we would have to contact.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. One of the things I thought about being a former sub back in my previous life for a while, a lot of subs tend to be retired teachers, or back when I was doing it, people that are older, semi-retired. And so if we lose a teacher, we're talking 21 days minimum, or 14 at least, or whatever I can't remember the isolation time, and then the make sure you're better time.
72 hours fever-free, and 10 days from the beginning of the symptoms.
So in
Gotta
my
know this
mind,
really
that's
well.
something we need to think about, because that's a lot longer than a teacher calling in for one day saying, I got a cold, I have a cold, kind of thing. So you answered one of my questions. We have decided not to do temperature screening, I gather, based on what you've said so far.
Correct.
I mentioned earlier, we were talking earlier around some stuff, but if there are students who have, say, asthma or something, and mask is a health issue, we have the option of something like a face shield in addition to just mask per se.
Yes, and those are the PPE, and for those kinds of individual circumstances, we want to work with each one of those kids and families to provide a safe alternative.
Let me make one final look and see if you answered all my questions around. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Again, thank you. I do have a couple questions. In terms of the implementation pieces, we've talked a lot about sanitation and processes and all. Who will that fall to throughout the day?
So with our classroom sanitization process, that will be the responsibility of our classroom teachers. Of course, we're going to be working in partnership with our facility teams to clean and sanitize other high-touch areas throughout the entire building. But we're definitely going to need some more hands and help in the process if we want to continuously sanitize our hard-touch surfaces, especially the ones in classrooms.
Okay, that was one of my questions. The other is, we have moved so well as a district to more collaborative learning and teaching in the classroom. We've adjusted some of our furniture and all of that. What configuration will the classroom perhaps look like?
Well, you brought up a great point. We have, changed a lot of the configurations of classrooms. You don't go into a lot of schools and rooms and see desks anymore. So that configuration will look a little bit different. We'll have some that have tables. We'll have some that have desks. But, it kind of goes back to within that context, and knowing those configurations will be different, and not just because of the configuration, but just because of the space. Physical distancing will be a challenge. And so all the more important reason why we wear face coverings during the day.
Okay, very good. The other thing is, I know there's been a number of points made about what will happen to fine arts and band and all. You mentioned specifically choir and PE, but have you had any discussions around some of the other encore type classes and how that would look?
We have band, we feel pretty good about with regards to actually what happens in band, even with instruments. Dr. Adiga, who specializes in epidemiology at Liberty Hospital, felt pretty confident and felt pretty good that we would be able to continue to use those instruments within the classroom. Of course, we'd continue to physically distance to the best of our ability, but instruments we felt pretty good about. But we do have some shared instruments throughout our school district. So the importance of sanitizing or ensuring that all of those precautions are taking place is a top priority. But we feel pretty good about band and orchestra and some of those others. Our real concerns, and the ones that we've really got to think about, is, of course, PE and also choir.
Anything where there's a lot of respiration.
Yeah, anything where there's a loud respiration. Yep.
Also, we didn't talk exactly about the time frame of this, so would you maybe address that also in terms of how long this might go on and what would trigger a change?
Well, in terms of triggering a change, we'll obviously work very close with our health department, with Clay County, throughout this entire process. And we know that we have a beginning of where we're going to start with some of our practices and really serving as our foundation. But I think the trigger for change will really be working with our health department and also applying some of these practices within our schools and just seeing how things go. I mean, this is an unknown for us, for our principals, for our teachers, and so we're going to collect feedback along the way. We've asked each one of our buildings to establish a return to school team that'll be made up of several staff members, and so we're going to have a pretty clear communication path between leadership here and our team along with our buildings team so that we can collect feedback from them, especially initially, especially from Crestview and Wynwood, as we begin to implement some of these practices to get an idea of what's really realistic in schools. That's the real big question, is that these recommendations have never played out in a school setting, probably since the pandemic with the flu in 1919. And so it has been that long since these types of recommendations have been put in place in the educational setting. So feedback from our staff, our community, and the health department will all be very important for us to learn how to navigate, I think, some of these situations.
If a child started in one place and the parent felt like it wasn't working for them, what would be the teacher and principal and district's response in those cases?
Yeah, if we have a child in a family that starts face-to-face and doesn't feel comfortable and wants to go to a virtual setting, we will absolutely accommodate that. And if in 2 weeks they want to come back to face-to-face, we will absolutely accommodate that as well. Our goal is to accommodate the needs of our students and families and provide them with the highest quality education that we can throughout this entire pandemic. And we're going to do whatever it takes to do that.
I really appreciate those words. In terms of people being able to see this plan that you've presented, not only the recording tonight from the meeting, but other information, will you be able to tell us where that is, or will Rochelle be addressing that later tonight?
Yeah, you want to?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I'm working with the other Northland schools. They would like to do some revisions, take a look at what we have. They're still waiting on some of the Clay County Health Department reviews for their plans. We would like to have one final reading together with the goal of having everything to every one of our communities by July 15th. And so we'll certainly continue to take input and feedback, but still trying to stay close to those other Northland schools so that we're consistent. I think we have 1 or 2 more meetings with Coughlin Metro-wide to make sure that things aren't changing too rapidly there. So just that whole piece of continuing to gather information is pretty important to us. As soon as this thing will be published, which I think it may have been leaked a few times, but as soon as it's published, it's going to change, and we know that. We're 2 months out from school starting, so there's going to definitely be changes between now and the start of school.
So the Let's Talk feature is still one of the options that parents have if they have some specific questions around their child and what's best for them.
Yep.
Okay.
I also think, Madam President, that summer school is going to give us a lot of information. Wynwood, Crestview, as well as summer school, we'll be able to see how things and make some tweaks to our plan to ensure that we're doing the most effective way.
So more to come,
More to come.
and a lot of flexibility. Very
Much.
good. Yeah. Anything else you would like to add to it?
Yeah, you said lots of flexibility. I think we talked about agility a little bit earlier with our budget. I would ask for the same. I know that we are receiving plenty of Let's Talk communications right now district-wide, and we encourage that. It's taken us a couple of days to get back with people with the high volume, and we are seeing both sides of the mask issue play out within Let's Talk. We have an obligation over 21,000 kids and 3,500 employees, and I think that's been our focus all along, and that's going to continue to be our focus all the way up to August 24th.
So additionally, waiting just a little bit for more information is also a strategy that
Yes.
our parents can have.
Yes. And-
Because more will change and more will come out.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Dr.
Okay.
Sutton.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. We are going to have survey results, and Dr. Daniels is going to present that.
All right. See in the data that we've separated it out into classified staff member responses first. Their survey looked a little bit differently. The goal of that one was to really gauge their satisfaction with potential job reassignments, and then clarity, and also to see if they had willingness to help if further reassignments were necessary. And then you'll see how the parents and teachers, those surveys were more like-minded so that we could have comparative data. Overall, we had 2,771 parents respond, 738 teachers, and 387 classified staff members. The classified group, again, I told you it had a little bit different purpose, but I thought it was important to highlight the great job that our HR department and then also department supervisors did in explaining the new role that many of our classified staff members had. You'll see that 90% of them agreed or strongly agreed that they really understood that role and purpose. More than half of them were willing to help us should we have a significant change again with food distribution, cleaning and sanitizing, and then any type of proactive measures that we might want to put into place moving forward. Overall, on the open-ended comments with our classified staff members, you saw a resounding gratitude for the board's decision to continue paying employees throughout this time. They really appreciated opportunities like food distribution. They said it gave them routine and purpose in such an unsettling era. Next, as I said, you'll see from the parent-teacher surveys that the questions were structured more similarly for ease and comparison. The vast majority of our parents and teachers were very satisfied with the e-learning experience. It was interesting to again read the open-ended comments where many of our parents had a newfound respect for teachers. They just echoed how suddenly they saw what it must be like on a day-to-day basis with their own child. Most agreed also that the coursework was just at the right level for students. You'll see there were a lot of positive comments from parents about teachers being able to just adjust on a dime and to translate those classroom experiences into quality virtual interactions. So again, just the right fit for student learning on the most part. Teachers found their assignments to be more relevant and more interesting than parents did. Here's the relevance slide. Here's the interest slide. And as a former high school teacher, I can attest to this. I know my stuff was very interesting, and I don't know that all students agreed. A point with a little bit of difference here, parents were much more satisfied with the level of interaction between teachers and students than what teachers were. It could also be assumed that children of the parents who responded to the online survey perhaps had greater interaction online as well. So you'll see the difference there. Next, you'll also see a stark contrast in the responses to feeling a part of the community with classmates. 35% of parents agreed, while 73% of our teachers believed that they had really built a strong classroom community. If you examine the open-ended responses, you'll see again that the parents really talk about how the children miss their friends and socialization more than anything. We also heard that echoed in the community conversations that I'll tell you about in a little while here too. So a little bit of difference there. Then, 80% of our teachers felt very comfortable interacting in a virtual environment, and then about 68% of the parents believed that their child was comfortable learning in this way. The comments indicated what you might expect, that for some children, a self-paced, asynchronous learning style was just really successful. It was exactly what the student needed. But then in other cases, we heard responses like, this is a great opportunity for a snow day, perhaps, but not a fix for all time. So disparity there. Then effectively managing work and home responsibilities proved difficult for many. Again, you'll see that 57% of the parents felt like they really accomplished this well, with 75% of teachers feeling that they struck the balance. Many parents did explain again in the open-ended section that they did well early on, but as the time progressed and the extensions were made, it became more and more difficult. A question that we had great interest in: assuming all guidelines for the opening of schools have been met, if given a choice, how would you prefer school be conducted in 2020-2021? And here are the results. For physical attendance, you'll see 55% of our parents were really asking us to take their children back in some cases. 38% of our teachers. And then a complete virtual experience, 12% of parents preferred that option. Most of them referencing until a vaccine was found. And then 18% of teachers, completely virtual. Then the combination of the two, 33% of our parents preferred that option, with 44% of our teachers.
Chuck, can I interrupt you for a
Please.
second? As I told the board, I'm on conference calls almost every day with superintendents in the metro. 3 of my colleagues have just released this same question, and they are seeing results as high as 90 to 95% of parents wanting kids back in school. I think it's going to be a long summer, but we're starting to see that trend upward. And this was May 22nd, so I'm curious to see where we will be in another month. It may be something worthwhile for us to check the data again.
Okay, so now that you've seen a quick overview of the data, let's go back to those actionable insights that we could draw out. So some of the things that actually affirmed our thinking: we have a staff. They are very appreciative and willing to serve, and that was just proven. In time of need, they came running. It was a wonderful time to see the good in people come out. We certainly had families who appreciated all of those efforts made too, and that was greatly expressed all throughout the survey. Overall, we saw that teachers adapted quickly to this virtual environment, and sometimes schools take a little heat for not being able to be quite so nimble, but we proved that we could do that. And then certainly there was overall great satisfaction with the experiment of e-learning. You saw a few points of which a parent saw a different experience for their student rather than what the teacher did, but those can certainly be learned from and adjusted. Pieces that challenged our thinking: creating community in a virtual space proved more difficult than what we had anticipated. And again, just trying to build those experiences for children who wanted to socialize and be with peers, how could we do that even more effectively in a virtual environment, might be something to look into should we have the need. Then again, families had great difficulty in managing both work and home responsibilities, and I think Chad alluded to this too. As we return to school in the fall, many will be back at work and unable to be home as they were during this time period. And then, because it seemed like so many of the open comments for teachers talked about how they surprisingly loved the virtual learning experience, you'll see some disparity between the teacher and then parent readiness to return physically to school. Teachers saw that as a much more viable option than what they had previously predicted. Finally, things that quantified importance as we create these actionable insights. We know that we have to build the confidence and trust in returning to our sites. People have been working so very hard to prepare for the safe return of our students. And it's now time for us to communicate effectively all of those measures so that we can reassure families that we are ready to welcome back their students. So that's definitely a next step. We've talked a lot tonight about being flexible and nimble as we enter the unknown. And then, as Dr. Clemens mentioned too, we know that the sentiment that I represented in these surveys can change as we have new information coming our way. We'll certainly use tools like the Let's Talk feature on the website for continued input and a temperature gauge, as well as additional surveys should we have the need. So with that being said, Madam President, I turn it back to you for any questions you or the board may have.
What was the breakdown of elementary school, middle school, high school? Do you have those numbers on what that would look like?
I can get you the exact numbers, but it broke down to be about 50% of our elementary, 50% of the responses were elementary, and then you saw about a 25 and 25% with our middle school age and then high school age. So majority of responses were elementary.
As Dr. Clemens had mentioned, it'll be interesting to maybe send out an abbreviated version of this. I mean, we haven't just completed e-learning, but definitely what you think schools need to look like, just get a barometer reading, and as we build up that confidence for them to come back.
Well, thank you very much, and I certainly appreciate the data that you provided tonight, and certainly you got input from our community with our parents and certainly with our staff, so that data is useful. Again, as we said many times tonight, that could change over time. But more than anything else, I think what we'd hope is, in many aspects, that we don't just return to yesterday, that we really do take this as a learning experience and how we can reconfigure the classroom, basically transform the way we teach, really bring innovation into our educational process as a result of this pandemic. Again, I think that it's an opportunity for us to figure out what worked and what didn't work with e-learning and how we can expand that and specifically drill down on our students as many, but by the time that many of our elementary students go to colleges in their day, certainly e-learning will be a major impact. So again, if we can learn from those experiences of what went right and what didn't go right and implement more of that type of instruction into our current curriculum, I think that our society will benefit as a whole. So again, trying to turn a negative into a positive, but again with data, with input, with survey results, we certainly have a basis to move forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. The data is informative. I think one of the things that wasn't stated is that we were able to implement e-learning with fidelity. The fact that we weren't limping into it, grabbing this, grabbing that, trying to find support systems and everything else gave everybody a chance to truly embrace e-learning and see what it was and to look at it. And I think that puts us in a very unique position of being able to truly evaluate what the options look like and what their impacts are. I think earlier in the board meeting we talked about variables. I think one of the biggest variables that's at play is how many of our students come August 24th are going to knock on our door, and how many of them are going to dial in, because that is a huge swing number. You've got a snapshot here that's good as of May, but I don't know how that compares with August, and we won't know until August. And so I think it's a variable that really plays havoc with our preparation for fall. Whether you're a teacher trying to figure out whether you're going to be teaching online or in school, whether you're trying to manage our facilities, whether you're looking at transportation, whether you're looking at finances, all of those are hugely impacted by that one variable. And we can do the surveys, and I think we absolutely should. But swings on reality are going to test our agility, I would suspect.
Okay. Thank you, Rochelle. I was really curious about the 18% teachers that want the virtual. Do we have any kind of breakdown in terms of whether those are elementary, middle school, high school, or?
The majority were secondary teachers. Mm-hmm.
It doesn't surprise me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if there's some way to work with that, Dr. Sutton, with, these are teachers that prefer this as a way of teaching, and also the parents who are still not comfortable with sending their child into a classroom building. If there's some way to make that happen, I'm not going against any of, this is the way we're going to do it. I'm just saying if there's some way that, those kind of things do seem to work better for others. And do we have any idea or data yet on like how much time, particularly secondary students, spent with the virtual? And I know that probably wasn't included in yours because you're...
It was. I'll get you that information. I'll have to follow up with it. But we did ask per grade level estimates of how much time was spent.
Okay.
I'll follow up
All
with
right.
that.
Yeah. And because I have friends with children in other districts, and I know they were posting things on Facebook like no more worksheets. They were just dying because of that. So anyway, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I apologize if I missed this while I ducked out. Was this a voluntary thing, or did you target people?
Voluntary. We opened it up to everyone, sent it as a direct
Okay.
email to all people in the district.
Okay. I would encourage a follow-up survey, and I probably might even encourage that it be targeted, and that you get some hard data based on grade levels, break down the whole bit, so we'll get a much cleaner piece of information in terms of being agile, as we've all said is going to be necessary. So I think a survey, even phone calling and just asking questions could be a good help to do that. As you know, I'm a big fan of data. So, third, did I see the number right? Teacher response to wanting to go back into the buildings? What was that percentage?
Physical percentage was 38%. Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of stunned.
But again, the combination of the two was 44% for
I understand,
teachers.
but I'm just surprised. Just one person's reaction. I want to hitchhike on Ms. Reinhardt's request that I would like to see by school data from the past. How often and what percentage of kids checked in, and how long did they stay checked in? I understand we have a system that allows that to be easily tracked in high schools and middle schools, but we don't have it for elementary schools, or?
Yes, that's my understanding as well.
So that's pretty important stuff. If we're going to be in this virtual land, we kind of need to know. My anxiety is that elementary school responses would probably not be as high, and in certain neighborhoods it'd be a lot lower. So I'd really like to see if my hunches hold up or not. So if there's a way we can get the computer to get that built into the system, I'd really like to see it.
Yeah, we'll work on that, Mr. Stone. I do believe there's a product out there that allow you to track how long students are over there.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if we collected the data, but I was really impressed anecdotally of some of the early adaptations we made as we enrolled online learning, going to 4 days a week instead of 5, and offering the professional development workshops as well as the parent workshops. Did you gather any feedback on that in terms of?
We did initially just to make those changes, but no, we don't
But not
have
again.
qualitative data on the success of it.
Okay. I felt like that probably some of what was resulted in terms of satisfaction came out of some of those adaptability issues. I thought that worked really, really well, and certainly anecdotally, I heard many, many positive comments for the district in that. So the other thing is, I just kind of keep going back, marveling at the fact that we had broadband, we had access for all of our students, and we had the one-on-one for every student so agilely. And this is really a source of pride for me. I am very proud of our district for how well it worked and how flexible people were under the circumstances. So thank you for doing this. I have really appreciated seeing it in data.
Thank you.
Okay. All righty. Any other questions on this topic? No? All right, because you are up next again, right?
I am.
Community Conversations Report.
Yes. In response to racial injustice, our students' voices via social media, and the fact that just because we weren't physically in school didn't mean that we couldn't respond to the needs of our students and families. We hosted community conversations on June 11th. The purpose of these conversations was to provide a positive platform beyond social media. We knew that that was what our students were turning to during this unique time where they didn't have access to each other in the same ways that they had in years past. Then we wanted to honor all voices. So very quickly, I pulled together a brilliant team of people, and they need to be named tonight. Renee Cooper, Chris Homiak, Denisha and Dr. Eric Johnson, Don Smith, Dr. Moss, Dr. Hilvitz, and Dr. Larry Smith came together just to brainstorm in a hurry. And they very quickly moved me from those first two areas under purpose of just getting your feelings out, wanting to be listened to, wanting to be heard, to actionable items. So we made it a point to focus on systems rather than just individuals alone, and then identify those actionable items for which we could then hold ourselves accountable. I loved how one reporter framed the opportunity that we had. He said our district's attempt to reverse the old adage, children should be seen and not heard, was very important. So tonight I just want to show you a short clip that you'll see with Gianna Copeland, a Wynwood student, and Dr. Leah Copeland's daughter. And then you'll hear our very own board president, Jan Kalk, as well.
Way? That is right, Laura. Many of us remember that old saying from our school days, children should be seen and not heard. Well, tonight the North Kansas City School District tossed that old idea and embraced a bold strategy when discussing something as important as equality and healing. Children need to be both seen and heard.
I'm friends with Muslims, I'm friends with black people.
The refreshing and unexpected wisdom of children, precisely why the North Kansas City School District organized today's frank conversation about race, healing, and where we go from here.
That they were using words, their own words, to begin to really identify what this felt like, their fears, their anxieties, their hopefulness, and that they had that language at very young ages.
We can't see ourselves in our teachers if our teachers don't look like us.
Teens, parents, and teachers invited to speak freely about delicate topics like recruiting teachers that look more like their students.
And they're growing up in a very different world, perhaps, than some of the rest of us. So if we don't allow them at the table, if we don't share the opportunities to hear from them, then I truly think that we're missing our best opportunity for our futures.
It's somewhat ironic that some of the most important lessons are happening in a classroom that hasn't been used for school in months. But today, the students became the teachers, and most left the panel feeling hopeful about a better tomorrow.
I like to say, like, walking in others' shoes, because you need to take a look and see what they're seeing instead of just looking through your lens.
Now, KC Mayor Quinton Lucas also joined in on that virtual discussion today. North Kansas City District leaders say today's session is the first of what will likely be many more of this kind of thing in the weeks and months to come. I'm Pat McGonigal for Fox 4 News.
To further describe the event for you, we had 27 facilitators who just answered the call in a hurry when we put this together. We had elementary and secondary versions of the content groups so that choices could be made. We had 227 participants who showed up at Gateway and Eastgate for 2 hours of conversation. We began the evening by establishing norms for the community circle that we were in, and then we built community through some of the following questions. So first, it was just to get acclimated. If you had to choose one word or phrase to describe how you've been feeling the last several weeks, what would it be? And then we asked what has been the hardest thing for you. And that produced deep, honest, raw conversation in many cases. It looked differently from group to group, room to room, but again helped establish community. After that portion of it, we moved to the panel section where we had each room listening to the virtual panel discussion that included, again, President Kalk, Dr. Clemens, a parent, Stephen E. Smith, 2 students, Isatu Nakulame and Lucas Van Kierspilk, and then Renee Cooper and Chris Homiak moderated the panel with questions. It was just a wonderful opportunity to establish some of the beliefs that North Kansas City Schools has and the values that you all have certainly expressed. So after the panel, which Mayor Lucas did make a little surprise appearance at as well, after the panel we went back to our reflective conversations, and these two questions were asked so that we could move into action and commitment. So what is one tangible step you can make towards progress regarding race relations? That was the individual commitment. And then we moved it to what can North Kansas City Schools do to support this effort? So facilitators kept record of all that was shared in the rooms, and particularly in response to what North Kansas City Schools could do, wanted to share the 6 key themes that emerged from the evening. I think you'll find some of them to sound very familiar as discussions that you all have had. I'm going to crystallize these very important messages from deep, meaningful conversation, but it's not meant to oversimplify. It's just a starting point for us here tonight. The first of the 6 themes involved educational experiences and belonging. Specifically, a lot of comments were made about curricular changes to be made beyond what we've already done, particularly that of our nation's history, greater representation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color throughout our lessons, then providing a greater student voice throughout our schools. We have diversity councils in place, but that was something that participants didn't seem to be as readily aware of. They also suggested that we name racism just as we would bullying in the classroom, and then empower elementary students by building empathy early on. The next theme was student discipline. On this section, they asked that we review handbooks and school policy, examining disproportionality, including suspensions, referrals, and just the overall treatment of students. Again, these are efforts that Dr. Hilbert started with our leadership team last year, but again, something that isn't readily known. Communication and community involvement was the next theme. We were asked to provide more opportunities for people to enrich their knowledge about having difficult conversations such as those about race. We were also asked to increase that community access to information. Many parents were saying, we don't know how to have this conversation with our own children, and they're looking to the school as a resource for that. We also used this as what we were discussing earlier, an opportunity to gauge temperature. We did hear from students who just spoke freely from the heart about some of the challenges that they were having, not only in response to racial injustice, but this unique coronavirus time. So again, the community asked that we do this to get a better read on where they were at. Funding was the next item. We were asked to increase funding for social emotional supports and then provide equity throughout all of our facilities. And as a result of the bond campaign, you know that that was a key goal amongst that, but that told me that the message could be shared more freely, more clearly. Hiring and recruitment was the next theme. They asked for greater representation at all levels, from the board, PTA councils, cabinet, administration, our teaching staff. They asked that Dr. Gaddy and team get the word out that when you interview with North Kansas City Schools, we are about equity and inclusion. And if you can't get on board with that, then you may not be the best fit for us. And finally, personal accountability came up. This was a commitment to a continued reflection on our own personal journey with race. They asked that we hold ourselves accountable, and they committed to do the same, to name and call out racism, and then removing the fear and having tough conversations, equipping our teachers with that ability when students do want to talk about it in classrooms. So again, these 6 themes emerged, and while North Kansas City Schools has taken great steps to address many of the items that I've shared with you this evening, our district statement on racial injustice reiterates the fact that this is not work that's ever going to be complete. It's not something for which we have arrived at any given point. But we have a lot of amazing people, all of the individuals I listed earlier, in addition to many more who are committed to this work. And we thank you as a board for empowering this bold opportunity to engage those we serve, and especially during this unique time, opening up our schools so that community could have a sense of coming together. So again, thank you for your ongoing commitment, and it's greatly appreciated as we do continue the journey all together. Madam President, I turn it back to you for more questions.
First of all, this is such an important endeavor, and I really appreciate it. I know that we all really appreciate it. Are there any more that are scheduled, or kind of what's the plan moving forward for continuing the conversation?
Well, we met today with Dr. Hilvitz and a team where we're starting to plan further community engagement in this way. And again, we know that not always does the topic need to be about equity and inclusion per se, but just something to get a read on the community at any point. So yes, further conversations. I'd say we certainly have a goal to host another one prior to school opening.
What are the efforts to, what does the strategy look like to really get the word out to many different, parts of our district as possible? One of the beautiful things about our district is that we are so diverse and we are so large, that sometimes it's also a challenge to get the message out to everybody equally.
At this point, we've used Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, our web page, and then the e-newsletter that goes out weekly. We use that on special occasions, and then the school messenger, an email or a text that can be sent home. So those are the primary modes. I have to say we were shocked at the attendance for something where honestly we had just issued word about it 1 week prior, and people really showed up in droves. It proved the need.
Yeah, it's very impressive.
I think the timing was critical. Our city was on the streets, protesting, screaming. This gave a positive platform for the community to come together. The group that I participated in, the emotions were raw. They were honest. The circle listened, and I think everyone left there with a feeling that we need to draw ourselves closer. Part of the COVID experiences played into this because we were in quarantine for so many months when things became heightened in the country that we're living in, and this was just a wonderful experience to draw people out of their homes, feeling comfortable enough to come to a school building that had the chairs stacked up in the corners, because we're cleaning buildings right now, but to really come together and express what they were feeling alone at home and find a community that could listen and provide support. So I think even people just listening to each other left with a sense of community.
Thank you for being there.
Well, again, thank you very much. This is extremely important conversation, and again, it's very timely, as mentioned. Probably my takeaway would be is, again, your presentation was very good. I'm certainly glad that we had the conversation, but how can we partner with other school districts across the state of Missouri and across the United States so that we can have these conversations not only locally but regionally and nationally, and kind of bring some of these issues that are facing our nation collectively back to our district so that we can be proactive. I think it also helps us to benchmark as we target the areas that you highlighted here. How do they look in our district, and how do they look in districts across our state or across our nation? And again, use those as benchmarks to help us move forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just a comment. I think this right now is about community and communication, and I think the effort to provide a dialogue and an exchange was something that demonstrates the vital role that a school system can play in a community beyond what goes on in the classroom. Executing it with fidelity and doing it in a way that voices were heard is extraordinarily valuable. And several of us, all of us, have received communications asking what's the next step after our statement as a district about what we believed needed to happen. This was tangible, this was real, but this was just a start. And so I'm proud of where we've started, what we've built on, we've been invested in this work for the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, and recognizing that we've got several more years of work ahead of us to get to an acceptable place. So thank you for leading this effort, and thanks for the brain trust you assembled to figure out how to make it happen.
Absolutely.
Okay. I would just reiterate what Dr. Ward said. I mean, I think this is a step in the right direction. Obviously, if the community shows up in these kind of numbers with such short notice, that this might be something that's much more worthwhile to pursue. So, thank you.
I was at Eastgate, and the room that we used was a really large room, and I was in one group, and it turned out more people kept coming in, so there were 2 groups in one room. And 2 things. One, I was fascinated by the cross-section of people that showed up. It was indeed a multi, in all kinds of ways, kind of group. And I would echo Mrs. Wartick's thoughts that the conversation was pretty straight, and people said what they had on their mind. So it went well.
Well, I was in the elementary room, and it was fascinating, and those kids truly were so articulate and so shared such meaning, such depth, and it gave me a lot of hope in terms of the conversations that the kids are picking up, what they will bring into their classroom, and our commitment to continue to move forward. I was very, very impressed. I thought the facilitators did a really wonderful job, and the resiliency to get this pulled together that quickly was part of the benefit, because I think people were feeling very emotional and very raw. And I was very pleased that we could do this. I also see with some of your recommendations real opportunity as we continue to look at our strategic plan, thinking several years back when the plan was created and how we have integrated equity and inclusion in all of our quadrants, not just isolated it in a bucket, but it becomes a part of our DNA and a part of our culture. I think that's starting to play out in this, and I just see so much more from the community that's saying it's resonating with them. Let's keep it up, and we will continue to move and be an example, I think, like you said, Paul, to other districts and state, and hopefully a great national dialogue. So thank you very much, and everyone involved. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. We are winding this meeting up. It's been a really exciting, informative meeting. Thank you, everyone, for your presentations. We're now to the board liaison reports, and who has any reporting? For your benefit, Gary, this is a time that we often report on committees or outside activities that individual board members have attended, and any information for the good of the board or the district that they bring to the table. So, you've reported on being at the conversations.
Conversations, but that's about the only thing that's been happening.
Okay.
Yeah, just real quickly, I participated in the Missouri School Boards Association Igniting Great Ideas Summit last Friday. That was kind of a virtual summit rather than an in-person one. And more than anything, it really focused on the COVID-19 and how school districts across the state are putting together reentry plans. So that was pretty much the topics that were covered. So, thank you.
I participated in the same MSBA conference, and it was, as Paul reported, also the delegate assembly occurred, and out of the delegate assembly there weren't any tumultuous results. The one was to change the mission statement for MSBA from building quality boards to building boards that could lead quality experiences for students. for all students. And so that was kind of, and apparently it was reported to me that somebody had put the same idea forth 10 years ago and it died. And this time it was celebrated and passed unanimously. So it's a bit of a changing of the times. Second thing, there was a TIF commission meeting last week. There were no significant issues for our district, and it kind of continues the trend that we've seen, which is that there are not a lot of new TIFs coming up in our district. And as a result, you saw in the report that Matt put up our first decline in total TIF assessed impact in probably, 10 years. So the dialogue around TIFs is changing. There is more concern about the impact on education and other taxing jurisdictions, and this seems to be a city council that is more sensitive to those issues than perhaps some of the former city councils were. And generally, everything else is shut down.
I was going to say, there's no place to go. This is the second time I've been dressed up in 3 months. So I'm like, no, I haven't done anything. Sorry.
I participated in the delegate assembly as well with Paul and Dr. Ward.
And I did as well. And the other presentation that I listened to was one on IEPs and the impact on special needs students and the struggles that they've had. So that was very informative. Also, the co-op, our cooperating school district of Greater Kansas City had a legislative update that Paul and I attended, and Dr. Clemens was elected president of that group this year. So we are very proud of that, and it's a very helpful group of all of the school districts that we learn a lot from. So that kind of winds up my participation as well as some of the others. Future board meeting or future meetings are attached to your packet, and there is a calendar. There are a few changes on it, so go back and look at it. I think one of the months we had the wrong day of week scheduled, so you might take a look at it as it goes forward. We also have a board retreat scheduled for August 6th and suggested board process review meeting on the 5th. And I've heard from several of you that that's a good date, and so we will get information out about that scheduled time and date and location to you all. Is there any other questions about meetings, meeting calendars, or dates? Our next meeting is the end of July. July 28th. And so we will see you in this room, probably, most likely, same format, and it'll be recorded. And I thank you very much for your attendance. I think the word of the day was agility. So we will all go forth with agility. Thank you very much for attending. Good evening. The meeting's adjourned.